Today marks a new chapter in my life, one I thought would start under happier circumstances. With both my parents having passed away, I find myself standing before the empty space where our family home once stood, now demolished by my husband Kevin. It was here, among the remnants of my childhood memories, that Kevin shockingly revealed his true intentions. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring your inheritance to our house," he exclaimed. His blunt words left me speechless, yet I couldn't help but let out a burst of laughter as the absurdity of the situation dawned on me. "Ah, I see. That's what this was all about," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. My husband Kevin and his parents looked at me with incredulity, unable to comprehend my reaction. I took a moment to introduce myself again as if it might shed light on the situation. "My name is Barbara. I come from a humble background, the daughter of a hard-working salaried employee. I married Kevin when I was 28, and we raised 3 wonderful children. Now, at 50, I had hoped for a peaceful life with my husband, but life had other plans. I recounted the arduous days of caring for my ailing parents, especially my mother's grueling fight against cancer. Despite the emotional and physical toll it took on me, Kevin's support was underwhelming. He often complained about the inconvenience of living with my sick mother, critiquing everything from the meals to the housekeeping. Ultimately, we moved back to my family home to better care for my mother. Throughout this period, Kevin's indifference persisted. As her condition worsened, leading to hospitalization and eventually her passing, Kevin's detachment during the funeral preparations was disheartening. At a time when I desperately needed his support, he stood aloof, even during the funeral, opting to stay at the back among distant relatives rather than with me in the family section. "I wish you would sit with the family," I had whispered to him during the service. His reply was cold and detached. "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all," he said. His mother, overhearing our conversation, interjected, "He's your husband, not your mother's son. Kevin is an outsider here." Even as whispers and rumors circulated among distant relatives about our strained relationship, Kevin's parents, echoing his detachment, argued that he shouldn't sit in the family area. This adherence to custom, they claimed, was appropriate despite the obvious strain it caused. After the funeral, we gathered at my home, joined by my brother's family and Kevin's parents. Despite their earlier insensitivity, I served them coffee and maintained my composure. Their remarks about the financial burden of condolence money, however, pushed me to my limits, revealing their true feelings about the entire situation. As I stood in the ruins of my childhood home, the reality of my new life without my parents and with a partner who seemed more a stranger than a spouse became painfully clear. I managed a smile and left the room, my heart heavy as I caught snippets of Kevin and his parents' conversation. They were discussing the difficulty of living with me, their words tinged with mockery. It wasn't the first time they'd shown disrespect. It had been a theme throughout our marriage, painfully evident during my father's funeral and my mother's recent passing. Reflecting on these moments, I realized how little they cared and how much I had tolerated Kevin's disengagement, even feeling guilty about the living arrangements I had imposed on him. Their laughter echoed behind me as I overheard them criticize my refusal to let them take my mother's belongings. I had insisted that her keepsakes be distributed among our family members, a decision that sparked a fierce argument, leading Kevin and his parents to storm out, branding me as an outsider. Kevin stayed away for a while after that incident. When he returned, he surprised me by expressing concern and offering travel vouchers for a getaway for me and the kids. His sudden change in demeanor left me bewildered but grateful. "I wonder if your father felt guilty," I joked as I accepted the vouchers. Kevin, in a lighter mood than usual, encouraged me to take my time. "Yeah, stay at the kids' places if you like," he suggested, planning to unwind at his parents' home during my absence. I took him up on his suggestion, visiting my daughter Susan and my son Stephen before the trip. It had been difficult to see them while I was caring for my mother. I spent some time cooking and freezing meals for them, easing their daily burdens. "Mom, you never get to relax, but thank you. This helps," they both said, appreciative of the home-cooked meals. Thanks to Kevin's unexpected gesture, the trip finally came, and I spent a relaxing time at the hotel with my children. The break seemed to wash away some of the fatigue and sorrow from the months of caregiving and the loss of my parents. After nearly a week, we returned home with renewed spirits and bright smiles. "That was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while," Susan suggested, a sentiment that caught me off guard. "Really, once in a while," I replied, still unsure about the sudden shift in Kevin's behavior, but willing to acknowledge his effort this time. I couldn't help but chuckle, albeit with a tinge of suspicion. "But I wonder if he's up to something," I said half-jokingly. Susan quickly dismissed my doubts. "Don't say that. Your father must have had his reasons," she replied confidently. I smiled, planning to return home, share the wonderful memories with Kevin, and perhaps start afresh in our married life. However, the scene that greeted me upon my return left me speechless. "What's going on? The house is—" My voice trailed off as I took in the sight of where our family home once stood, now shockingly absent. Then Kevin appeared, his parents smirking behind him, their expressions unnervingly gleeful. "Kevin, what's the meaning of this?" I demanded, my confusion turning to anger. Kevin, mirroring his parents' unsettling smiles, responded, "Finally, the baggage is gone. From today, we'll be living with my parents at my house." His words hit me like a cold splash of water. "Why are you talking about this?" I countered, struggling to maintain my composure against Kevin's arrogant declaration. He coldly continued, "Lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Come to our house with the inheritance already. Everything you inherited belongs to Kevin." The truth was stark and painful. The disappearance of my house was Kevin's doing, a ploy for inheritance. Despite the overwhelming mix of frustration and sadness, I refused to let Kevin manipulate the situation. "No way," I thought to myself and burst into laughter at their smug faces. "What? Why are you laughing? What a strange woman, has she gone mad?" my mother-in-law muttered, looking at me as if I were a ghost. Facing them squarely, I declared, "Don't you guys know? I didn't inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance." My laughter resumed, mocking their greedy assumptions. Kevin, confused and angry, demanded, "What do you mean? Explain yourself." But I chose silence. There was no need to enlighten them further. "I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone," I said firmly, rejecting his proposal outright. My mother-in-law's anger flared. "You helped with your parents' household, but you won't do ours?" she accused. "You know why I did that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? But you chose to do so because you didn't want to do housework," I retorted, leaving Kevin and his mother biting their lips in frustration. "And demolishing my family home on your own? There are things you can and can't do," I yelled at them, the betrayal cutting deep. Without another word, I left the scene, Kevin's voice trailing after me. "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I needed to secure a place to sleep for the night and couldn't bear to see Kevin's face any longer. Immediately, I consulted a lawyer. It couldn't be that easy to demolish a house, especially one still in my mother's name. Upon investigation, an unbelievable truth came to light. Kevin and my father-in-law had orchestrated the demolition themselves, utilizing acquaintances from my father-in-law's demolition company and renting heavy machinery. They had even given me the travel vouchers to conveniently get me out of the way. The realization of such deceit brought tears to my eyes and filled me with a profound sense of betrayal. "Is there any way to punish the three of them?" I asked the lawyer through tears, desperate for justice. The lawyer gave me a reassuring smile as he laid out the legal options. "Your husband, who demolished the house registered under your mother's name without permission, can be charged with criminal damage and sued for compensation," he explained. Encouraged, I nodded, and he promptly began the legal proceedings. A few days later, an irate call from Kevin interrupted my thoughts. "What's this letter of demand about?" he demanded. "Oh, you received it. Since you destroyed our important house, you'll have to compensate, I replied calmly, despite my rising anger. Compensate? I told you we were moving into the family home. I demolished an unused house for you. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Just bring your inheritance and come back home, Kevin insisted arrogantly. Grateful? For having our home demolished? Really? I scoffed over the phone. And about the inheritance and coming home, there's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything, I shouted back, my frustration evident. Kevin fell silent, caught off guard by my outburst. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was because of this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. It was obvious we would have discussed the inheritance, I continued. I told her I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. Thus, all cash and securities were inherited by my brother. He said that I should get the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out to someone else. That was the plan for me to inherit the house. Now, either you and your father restore the family home to its original state or pay the amount written in that letter. I'm being kind enough to suggest a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you. I spoke firmly. Sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry, Kevin replied, his tone changing. He began making excuses, suggesting that as long as the family home was there, he couldn't live with his parents, especially since his father had always wanted to live with us. My father-in-law was particularly fond of my son Stephen and had previously expressed a desire to live with him. They had refused to live together back then because it would have made commuting difficult, but his parents seemed to think I was the one opposed to it. It turns out that Kevin had convinced his parents to agree to this plan by demolishing my family home and making them believe I would move in with the inheritance. This revelation only added to my resolve to see this legal battle through, ensuring that justice was served for the unwarranted destruction of my family home. Even with Kevin's new revelation, forgiveness was far beyond my grasp. Please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too, Kevin pleaded over the phone. If he's truly remorseful, then he'll agree to the settlement, I responded firmly before hanging up. Despite his continual apologies through calls and messages, insisting he was sorry, I remained steadfast. If you're sorry, then hurry up and transfer the money, I pushed back, knowing well that our beloved family home was beyond restoration, but seeking some form of reparation for the deep hurt caused. In the meantime, I stayed at my brother's place with Susan. My brother, aware of the situation and likely furious about the demolition, done without his consent, supported my stance. I won't interfere, but I'll lend a hand. Do what you think is right, Barbara, he encouraged. Everyone around me condemned Kevin's reckless actions and supported me through this ordeal. A month passed with no compensation, and during that time, Kevin ceased all contact. I couldn't impose on Susan's hospitality indefinitely and was eager to secure the promised funds to stabilize my living situation. However, a startling discovery interrupted these plans. One day Susan, looking at her smartphone, remarked, "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's." She showed me the screen. It was a product page on a flea market app. The item resembled a unique apron I had made for my mother. "What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so there's no mistake," I said, shocked. Susan scrolled through other listings, and we found nearly 50 items that unmistakably belonged to my mother. It was clear to me that Kevin was behind this. Furious, I called him immediately. "What's this about the app, Kevin?" I demanded. He sounded annoyed and feigned ignorance. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's belongings, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now," I confronted him. Kevin, sounding panicked, denied everything. "What? No, it's not me," he stammered. Undeterred, I retorted, "Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back." Susan and I drove to Kevin's parents' house. Upon arrival, I called out for Kevin, who met us at the entrance, visibly flustered. "I don't know anything about it," he insisted. Susan, supporting me, pressed him for answers. While this was happening, Kevin's parents, likely aware of our presence, came outside. His mother, seeing Susan, greeted her with a smile, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Susan, you're here," she said cheerfully. Susan, clearly upset, urged her grandmother. "Tell Dad to tell the truth." "The truth? It seems like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma passed away with," Susan disclosed. Hearing this, my mother-in-law laughed, dismissing the accusation. Kevin looked increasingly troubled, repeating, "It's not me." Then his mother interjected loudly, "Kevin selling them? That can't be true." The situation escalated quickly as we confronted the tangled web of deceit, hoping to reclaim what was rightfully ours and uncover the truth behind the distressing sales. The revelation from my mother-in-law left me stunned and drained of color. "But I'm the one selling them," she cheerfully admitted, oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Kevin glanced at his mother with a worried look, clearly aware of the brewing storm. Susan beside me was equally shocked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" I managed to utter, struggling to keep my voice steady. My mother-in-law, undeterred, continued to explain her new hobby with a light-hearted air. "It's quite a task, you know. Packaging has to be done carefully, and the photos need to be taken well," she said, treating the whole ordeal as if it were a fun pastime. She seemed completely unaware that she was handling and selling stolen goods. My frustration boiled over. "Cancel the listing! That's not something Grandma can just sell!" Susan implored, her voice breaking as she tried to reason with her grandmother. But my mother-in-law dismissed her pleas casually. "What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, and the rest makes a nice little income. It's good for preventing dementia after all. I'm the only grandma left, and Susan, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she retorted, her tone flippant and dismissive. It was clear she wouldn't listen to our pleas. Realizing that talking would get us nowhere, I took decisive action. "Let's go home, Susan. But first we need to address this properly," I said, pulling a reluctant Susan with me as we left the house and headed straight to the police station. I had not initially planned to involve the police in the house demolition, but theft and unauthorized sale were a different matter entirely. The officers were prompt in their response, and the flea market app company cooperated by suspending my mother-in-law's account, ensuring no more items would be sold. After leaving the police station, I called Kevin. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit. Also, I filed a police report. Please cooperate with the investigation," I asserted firmly. Kevin, frantic, tried to plead family ties. "We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it." "Stranger, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house being demolished. And I see no remorse from you," I countered, my anger evident. Despite my frustrations, I wasn't devoid of compassion. Having shared many years with Kevin, I sighed, acknowledging the long and possibly rocky path ahead in resolving these issues. "I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And Kevin, your father looked very ill. Has he been to the hospital?" I inquired, a part of me still concerned for his well-being despite everything. I had seen my father-in-law earlier, and he looked significantly thinner and unwell compared to just a few months ago. It seemed unlikely that the family had even noticed his declining health amidst their other preoccupations. The next day, my father-in-law called, not to express gratitude, but to scold me. "You're treating me like a sick person, planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me. I have to protect Kevin and your mother. I'm not going to any hospital," he protested. His response to my genuine concern stung. "I apologize if it was out of line. I was just concerned. I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't patronize me," he snapped back, his words harsh and dismissive. His reaction only added to the complexity of our already strained relationship, leaving me to navigate these turbulent family dynamics with care and resolve. A few days after our conversation, my father-in-law's health declined significantly, leading him to seek medical attention. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Kevin, in a state of panic, called me. "Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do?" he asked, his voice laden with anxiety. I responded coolly, remembering past grievances. That's none of my concern. Remember what you said when I suggested the hospital? You said you're not weak and short-lived like my parents. Deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless? Kevin retorted. Who's the heartless one? Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your actions. I snapped back and ended the call. Sadly, my father-in-law passed away shortly after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor resentment towards someone who had passed away, but recalling all that had transpired, I found myself unable to mourn him genuinely. After the funeral, a will was discovered. It detailed that the house would be inherited by my grandson, Stephen, and the remainder of the estate was to be divided between Kevin's mother and Kevin. I was surprised to see Stephen named in the will. My father-in-law had always favored him, perhaps hoping Stephen would continue to live in the house. Despite the inheritance potentially being more of a burden due to taxes and maintenance, Stephen was pleased to inherit the house. Although I had concerns, it wasn't my place to interfere. Stephen's inheritance proceeded, and my mother-in-law, delighted, paid the inheritance taxes, claiming it was all worth it for her grandson. Despite my mixed feelings about the situation, I didn't say anything further. Then, something unexpected happened. Responding to a message from Kevin, I visited his parents' house. Arriving there, I was met with a shocking sight. Heavy machinery and demolition workers were tearing down the house. It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Stephen declared, seemingly unbothered by the destruction. Stephen, what are you doing? Stop it right now, I cried out, my heart sinking. Even if I stop now, we can't live there anyway, Mom, Stephen responded calmly. My mother-in-law and Kevin, witnessing the destruction of what was once a significant asset, pleaded with Stephen to stop, but he was resolute. Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Grandma, you were horrible to her too, right? Did you apologize? Stephen's tone was sharp, his earlier calmness replaced by a stern demeanor. His words cut deep, and both Kevin and his mother were visibly shaken, kneeling as the machines loudly continued their work. Witnessing the scene, I felt a complex mix of emotions, but ultimately a sense of relief. It seemed that Stephen, in his way, was settling scores, correcting past wrongs against our family. Later, Kevin, having finally received his inheritance, paid the compensation and damages owed to me. Stephen had also managed to recover the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, ensuring their safe return. Mom, you've got me and Susan, Stephen reassured me. And in that moment, overwhelmed by the support of my children, I finally allowed myself to shed tears of relief. Kevin and his mother, having lost their house and now with limited resources, moved back into company housing, and their fortunes dramatically reversed. Through it all, the bond between Stephen and Susan remained our strongest asset, a source of mutual support and love in the face of adversity. Now, Kevin and his mother had become the subject of local gossip after moving back into company housing. A wife of one of Kevin's colleagues, with whom I have a friendly relationship, reached out to me. I shared the entire backstory with her honestly. Given Kevin's upcoming retirement, it seemed that they would need to be frugal about their future living arrangements. They might find living in company housing uncomfortable, but it was a situation of their own making. Occasionally, I thought of asking friends for updates on Kevin and his mother, more out of curiosity and to have a story to share than anything else. Meanwhile, I continued staying with Susan, but changes were on the horizon. Stephen, now in a much better place financially thanks to the sale of the land where his parents' house once stood, was planning to get married and build a new home. The proceeds from the land had turned out to be surprisingly substantial, rendering the demolished house unexpectedly beneficial. Mom, come live with us. Stephen had invited me warmly, his soon-to-be wife echoing his invitation with genuine enthusiasm. Knowing I couldn't stay with Susan indefinitely, I gratefully accepted their offer. I was determined to be a different kind of mother-in-law, one who nurtured and supported her family without overstepping. With this new chapter on the horizon, I looked forward to building a happy life with my expanding family, filled with love and mutual respect.
I can't believe you didn't show up for your husband's surgery. You're an awful daughter-in-law. This is unacceptable. My mother-in-law called me early in the morning and started shouting as soon as I picked up the phone. What do you mean? I don't have a husband or in-laws, I exclaimed, completely baffled. What are you talking about, Melody? She pressed, her voice trembling with anger. You're Easton's wife, aren't you? Have you finally realized how unsuitable you are as a wife? She continued, waiting for my response. Taking a deep breath, I replied calmly, Haven't you heard from Easton? We're already divorced. Her silence on the other end was priceless, but the real surprise came next. My name is Melody. After graduating from a local university, I decided to work for a major company in New York and started living alone. Life in the city and my first job were both daunting, but I was filled with more expectations and motivation than anxiety. I would summarize the work I learned from my seniors in my notebook on the same day and check what I should do the next day. My serious work style was appreciated by both my seniors and bosses, and by the time I had been with the company for a year, I gradually began to be entrusted with various tasks. When junior colleagues joined the company, I became a senior and naturally became more involved in educating my juniors, wanting to return the favor I had received from my seniors. One of those juniors was Easton. Easton had graduated from a top university's master's program and was already a respected figure when he joined the company. I, who was full of motivation at the time, was appointed as Easton's mentor. The smart Easton immediately understood what I said and learned more and more about the job. It was an exciting experience to convey my own experience to Easton and see it applied to the job. Easton's well-targeted questions became an opportunity for me to grow as well, and we started going out for drinks together after work, not just during work. I soon realized that spending time with Easton was more enjoyable than anything else, and Easton felt the same way. Hey, are you two dating? A common senior who saw us going out for drinks every day and getting along well asked us that. No, it's not like that, I replied, laughing. But I want to date Melody, Easton said, looking directly at me. It seems so. What about you? The senior continued, prompting me. I also want to date Easton, but, I admitted shyly. Thus, Easton and I started dating with the company's approval, and 2 years later, we got married with blessings from both inside and outside the company. Easton, I feel fulfilled with my current job, and above all, I enjoy it. Even after we got married, I want to continue working, I told him after we were married. Of course, I fell in love with you, who is lively and passionate about her work. I'll help with the housework from now on, my husband said, respecting my feelings and agreeing to a dual-income lifestyle. However, his mother did not approve of our life. During my first New Year's visit home after getting married, my mother-in-law confronted me. Melody, when are you going to quit your job? She asked abruptly. Well, as I've said before, I find my work fulfilling, so I plan to continue working for the time being, I replied, trying to stay polite. You've been married for a year already. You should have children soon and leave the job to your husband. You should focus on being a good wife, she insisted. But Easton and I have talked about this, I explained, hoping she'd understand. He is just being nice to you. It's ridiculous to make your husband do housework, she shot back, dismissing my attempts to reason with her. No matter how much I tried to explain, she wouldn't listen. Easton stepped in to help. Wait a minute, Mom. Melody and I have talked about this. Fine, but that won't change the fact that Melody will just keep pushing things too far, my mother-in-law huffed. I'm happy with our life right now. If there's anything wrong, we'll talk to you about it, my husband replied, firm but calm. Well, if my son says so. With Easton's words, my mother-in-law reluctantly backed down. I thanked my husband quietly. Thank you, Easton. No, I'm the one who should apologize for putting you in this position. If my mom bothers you again, let me know immediately, he replied, reassuring me. I was a little worried about my mother-in-law, but thanks to Easton's kindness, I was able to enjoy my newlywed life, both publicly and privately. A few months later, I was offered a promotion. I told my husband first. Easton, listen. I'm going to be promoted this April, I announced, excited. Promoted to manager? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, my boss recognized my hard work, I said, expecting him to share in my happiness, but his face darkened. Melody, whose credit is that? He asked coldly. What? I was taken aback. You're good at your job because I help with the housework, right? Isn't it strange that you were promoted before me? You're getting in the way of my promotion, he said bitterly. What are you talking about? I asked, bewildered. This didn't sound like the husband I knew. He suddenly blamed me with an incomprehensible theory. The kind Easton I had known seemed like a lie. Wait. You agreed that I could balance work and family, didn't you? I reminded him. Balance? He frowned. Housework is only possible because I help. Can you really say that you're balancing work and family? You're not qualified as a wife. That's not true, I protested, feeling hurt. Easton added insult to injury. If you can't do housework properly, why don't you quit your job and focus on your family? I don't want to quit my job. My boss recognized my hard work. I'll work harder at home too, I replied, desperate to salvage our partnership. I decided to take on all the housework without relying on my husband, hoping he would approve of me. But Easton didn't help at all. He even started complaining about the housework he never commented on before. Did you just grill meat for dinner today? He asked one evening, scrutinizing the meal. Huh? It's sautéed pork, so I seasoned it, I explained, surprised by his sudden critique. Isn't this a shortcut? You only make simple things because you're working, right? He remarked dismissively. My husband started coming home late, saying he was going to drinking parties, and we began to drift apart. Easton, why don't we eat dinner together once in a while? We haven't talked much lately either, I suggested, hoping to reconnect. No matter how much I tried to reach out to him, he wouldn't listen. What? I don't want to eat your lazy meals anymore, he snapped. It seems that even at work, he complains about how I'm cutting corners with housework. That's not all. It seems that my husband has been complaining to my mother-in-law about me, and her attitude towards me has gotten even worse. Melody, you said you would do the housework yourself, but it seems like you haven't been cooking at all lately, she criticized. That's because Easton hasn't been coming home, I explained. Excuses are unbecoming, his mother replied coldly. Your husband isn't coming home because you're not doing your housework. As a wife, you should create a home he wants to come back to, my mother-in-law admonished me. I'm sorry, I muttered, feeling defeated. From the beginning, Easton, who graduated from a top university, and you, who graduated from an unknown local university, were never a good match. And yet you're so cheeky as to want to work together without even being grateful for getting married, she concluded. Even if I wanted to talk to Easton about it, he had started coming home in the morning, not just late at night. Easton, are there really that many company drinking parties? I asked him. Who are you drinking with all the time? He dodged the question, saying, You don't need to know that. Even couples need privacy. I felt something suspicious about my husband's words and actions, but he didn't try to talk to me anymore and immediately locked himself in his room. The next day, I was convinced that my intuition was right. On my way home, I realized I had forgotten something at work and was on my way back when I encountered Easton walking arm in arm with a strange woman. I immediately sent him a message. Easton, are you still at work? I have something important to tell you. Can you come home? He replied, I can't come home because of work. My husband was clearly lying. Has he been pretending to work and meeting women like this all along? I confronted Easton, who came home in the morning. Welcome home, I said, waiting for him in the dark room. What? He was surprised to see me. I told you I had something important to tell you, I continued. Can't you wait until tomorrow? I'm tired from work, he replied. Work? Is meeting women part of your job? I exclaimed indignantly and showed him the secretly taken photo. His face changed quickly, but he immediately said, This is your fault too. If you were a better wife, I wouldn't have been wandering around with other women like this. What? That doesn't mean you can cheat? I tried to stay calm, but my voice trembled with anger. Easton frowned and stayed silent, unwilling to respond. I grew angrier at his stubborn silence. I'm doing most of the housework, and I'm doing my duty as a wife. So what's the problem? I asked, exasperated. It's because you're acting all high and mighty after your promotion, he muttered. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm angry because you act so high and mighty after being promoted, he continued bitterly. You can't even do your job that well. The only reason you were promoted is because your boss likes you. Don't get carried away, my husband concluded. With Easton's words, I finally understood why his attitude had changed so much. He was simply upset that I had been promoted before him. If that was the case, he should have worked harder himself. All Easton did was hold me back, and I felt my respect for him fading. Without noticing my growing indifference, my husband continued justifying himself. You said you were doing most of the housework, but everything you do is subpar. Subpar? I echoed, shocked. The house is dirty and the food is terrible, he said with a sneer. Try putting yourself in my shoes, living in such an unpleasant environment. The reason I cheated was because you're an unqualified wife who can't do her job properly. Easton's triumphant smile made me angrier than ever. I understand. If that's the case, let's just get a divorce, I responded. Ignoring his stunned expression, I quickly packed my things and left the house. The next day, I signed the divorce papers and sent them to my home. Then, I rented a new room and started living alone. A few months later, I was suddenly awakened by a phone call from my mother-in-law early one morning. As soon as I answered, she began to shout, I can't believe you didn't show up for your husband's surgery. You're an awful daughter-in-law. This is unacceptable. What? What are you talking about? I don't have a husband or in-laws, I replied, bewildered. What do you mean, Melody? You're Easton's wife, aren't you? Have you finally realized how unsuitable you are as a wife? She kept accusing me. My silence made her sigh. Well, never mind. If you want to be recognized as a wife, come to the hospital right now, my mother-in-law demanded. Apparently, my ex-husband had been taken to the hospital after hitting a guardrail while driving on his day off. When I heard the name of the hospital, I calmly told her, Mother-in-law, haven't you heard from Easton? We are already divorced, I explained. What? Divorced? She gasped. Yes, we got divorced because of his infidelity, I replied. Infidelity? My mother-in-law screamed in disbelief. Without paying attention to her shock, I continued. Moreover, he blamed me for his infidelity and said he wasn't at fault. My son isn't at fault. That's right, that must be it, she muttered to herself as if she understood everything. Easton would never cheat on his own. If he did, it's your fault for being a bad wife. I was amazed that my mother-in-law was echoing Easton's words. I repeated calmly, even so, infidelity cannot be justified, can it? My mother-in-law suddenly fell silent. I gave up on questioning her and finally told her, Oh, by the way, mother-in-law, thank you for calling me today. What? What are you thankful for? She asked, puzzled. I was worried about where to send the reminder letter because Easton had moved out of the apartment. Reminder letter? She asked. When we divorced, I claimed compensation, but the payment is currently overdue, I responded. At the word compensation, my mother-in-law suddenly became flustered. Before she could say anything, I continued. I thought it was inappropriate to involve you in our marital affairs, so I was hesitant to send it to you. But thanks to you, I know where Easton is now. I'll go and deliver it right away, I concluded. My mother-in-law hurriedly stopped me, saying, Wait a minute. Easton just had surgery yesterday. Don't do anything that will hurt his wound. To which I replied, But even if you say that, if I miss this opportunity, Easton might run away again, right? Wait, she pleaded. We have to pay for the surgery now. We can't afford to pay compensation. He doesn't have much savings, so I have to pay for the surgery. I had a suspicion that my ex-husband might have used his savings for the affair. But that's his own fault, and it's not a reason to stop claiming compensation. My mother-in-law entreated me as I remained silent. Then tell me the name and address of the affair partner. Easton will surely leave you and be with her. I would ask her for some money. Oh, I think that's an impossible request, I replied. Why? She asked. The affair partner also had a husband. Moreover, even though the affair was discovered, they didn't get divorced. They've already paid the compensation in full, so they probably don't want to have anything to do with Easton anymore, right? My goodness, my mother-in-law let out a despairing voice as she realized there was nothing she could do. Ignoring her, I calmly told her, "I'll come over there now. You said, come right away, mother-in-law." "Wait, please," she begged, but I hung up the phone. I went to the hospital my mother-in-law told me about and handed the reminder letter to Easton, who was exhausted after the surgery. My ex-husband entreated me in a pathetic voice. "Melody, I've been a mess since we broke up. I need you after all. Can't you forget the past and start over?" My mother-in-law followed, urging, "That's right, Melody. You can work as much as you want from now on. If you want to support Easton, who can't work due to hospitalization, now is the time, right?" Disgusted by their selfishness, I told them impassively, "I came here to hand over the reminder letter. If you keep making ridiculous remarks and refuse to pay compensation, I'll take you to court." After telling them that, I left the hospital room without waiting for their response. The word court seemed to have an effect, as my mother-in-law immediately transferred the compensation to me. However, a colleague from my company who visited the hospital overheard everything, and soon word spread that Easton was paying compensation due to his cheating and our divorce. His reputation as a cheater became widespread, and he found himself the center of contempt. Unable to endure the looks he received, he resigned from the company. Easton moved out of his new place and returned to his parents' home. He tried to get a new job, but he aimed only at companies with higher salaries than mine, leaving him unable to find work for a long time. He couldn't even repay the money to my mother-in-law and, needing money immediately, began working as a day laborer to earn his keep. On the other hand, I was freed from Easton and my mother-in-law and could devote myself even more to my work. I was promoted again and felt more fulfilled in my career. For myself, who has worked hard steadily, and for my boss who promoted me and my senior who carefully taught me, I swore to face my work sincerely from now on.